Hey everyone, hope you are all doing great. Welcome to the another episode and the last episode of AZ900 with Navika. And it would be an exciting session. Please drop all questions that you all have, and we'll pick it up from the chat section. But yes, before we start our today's event, let's go through the code of conduct. We are all here to learn together, participate together. So please be respectful of other people's views, understanding their differences. Be kind and considerate in a way we all engage. Yes, we do encourage you all to participate. Please drop all your questions in the comment section, like said. And yes, now I would like to bring in our MVP who's driving this entire series, Navika. Hey, hi Navika, how are you?
Hi Parth, all well. Thank you for having me. How are you?
I'm all well, all great. So we had a great journey of AC900. So I
Yes.
hope this after this again we'll have many more series to be planned, and we'll program it as soon as possible.
For sure. Looking forward to it.
Yep. Sharing your screen now. Great. The floor is all yours.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Hi everyone. Welcome to the fifth and the last session of our ongoing series at Microsoft Reactor Bangalore, AZ900 with Navika. And today is going to be the last session, as even Parth mentioned, and we are going to be covering the topic understanding Azure management and governance. For those who are joining maybe for the first time or missed the initial sessions, a quick introduction about myself before we get started. So, hi, I am Navika Chhauda, and I am currently working as an Azure Cloud Engineer. I'm also Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in the Azure category for the second time in a row now. And technical communities have always been an integral part of my journey. Earlier as a gold Microsoft student ambassador for 3.5 years, and now as Microsoft most valuable professional for 2 to 2.5 years now. And being part of technical communities, I've got some great opportunities, such as to be a Microsoft Ignite speaker, judge Microsoft Imagine Cup Junior, or I love to mentor, young people in tech, and people who are enthusiastic about technology. So I have been mentoring even at hackathons such as Tech Together Hackathon at Seattle and Chicago. Apart from that, I'm very passionate about using tech for a good cause, and I try to empower the vulnerable section of society with Microsoft tools and technologies such as Office 365 and Microsoft Azure. And in terms of my technical knowledge, I my entire technical background is everything about cloud computing and Microsoft Azure. That's what I aim at, and that's what my forte and expertise is in. And for the work that I have been doing, there have been some accolades and appreciations that have come along, such as the Women's Achiever of India or India Book of Record holder, and what you can see on the screen. So, yes, that's a bit about myself. And as you can see towards the bottom, I have my social media credentials on. So Navika Chhauda is my LinkedIn ID. Feel free to connect with me over there. In case you have any questions, you can ask towards the end of the session as well. But if later on after math you get certain questions, please feel free to DM me on LinkedIn. I would be more than happy to answer them out. And even in general, if you have any doubts or you have any, you need some type of mentoring or some guidance in the tech world, always there is an MVP. And I also have a YouTube channel, Navika Chhauda, wherein I have my tech chat with Navika, a podcast series going on, when we invite leaders, technical leaders from all across the world, so that they can share the knowledge in a particular technical stack where they have their expertise on. So yes, feel free to check out the YouTube channel as well. And yes, that's pretty much about myself. And now getting started with the session. So firstly, quickly setting up the agenda for today. 1 second, please. Yes. So, setting up the agenda for today. So, firstly, I'm going to be doing a quick recap. As I said, today is the fifth session. So, we have done four sessions before that. For the people who are really new today, like they're just seeing the session today directly, so I would be doing a quick recap as to what we have covered. And also, maybe Parth can share the link to the previous sessions of the playlist on the chats as well, so that you can refer to it in case you haven't. After that, coming on to the topic today, that is about governance and compliance tools in Azure. So, firstly, we would be starting with that. We would be covering Microsoft Purview, Azure policies, and resource logs within that. And then we would be discussing as to how can you manage and deploy your resources on Azure, which includes how can you interact with Azure resources, which considers of different tools such as Powershell, Azure Portal, or CLS. We will be discussing about that, and then we would also be having we'll do a quick high level overview of what Azure Arc is all about, and then we would be discussing about monitoring Azure resources. How can you do that with the help of Azure Advisor and Azure Monitor? And I'll try my level best to show you uh, simultaneous examples on the Azure portal as well, as in when we can do that. So, yes, getting started now. So, quick recap of what we have done in the previous sessions, right? So, the very first session we started about the core concepts of cloud. Um, and Azure. So basically, we covered the basics of cloud over there. What is cloud computing? What are the advantages? Why should you go in for a cloud? And cloud deployment models, different cloud services that are provided, so on and so forth. So we had covered all of that. Like we literally started from the scratch, right? And in the second session, we covered Azure architecture and services, which included diving into the world of Azure and how do you work with Azure Portal, how can you deploy your resources over there, and then we deep dived into Azure Compute Resources, wherein we discussed about virtual machines and we also discussed about networking. How can you monitor the performance, cost related things, etc. So we covered all of that. In the third session, we discussed about Azure storage services, which include different type of different types of Azure storage services like blob, files, queues, tables, etc., etc. All of this included practical demos as well. So, in case you want to have a look at it, please feel free to just sort of refer to the previous video so that you get a good knowledge of how can you practically deploy resources to Azure and about all these different topics that we have discussed. Sorry, in the last session we discussed about Azure identity access and security, where it was more related to identity management, and it was more related to RBAC roles, and what is the zero trust policy, etc., etc. So we had covered all of that stuff in the last session. So this is what we have done till now. And in order to complete the entire series of ASIN 900, we have the last topic left, what we are going to be doing today in the fifth session, right? So to get started with it, the first main subtopic of today is understanding the features and tools for governance and compliance. So we know how important it is in Azure to ensure that your all your resources are compliant enough, and it's and from the governance perspective. So that is an important topic which we would be understanding now. So the very first thing that we are going to be understanding is Microsoft Purview. So, what is Microsoft Purview? So, Microsoft Purview is basically, you can say in a way, it is a family of data governance, compliance, and risk governance and compliance all together, right? That basically helps you manage your data in a single view altogether. So, Microsoft Purview basically, you can see it from three different areas. So, it helps us to get insights from the on prem, multi cloud, and software as a service data. So there are a couple of features of Microsoft Purview altogether, which helps us achieve our goal of sort of getting the insights into our data. So that is automated data discovery, sensitive data classification, and end-to-end data lineage. Now, if in all I need to talk about two main solutions of that comprises of Microsoft Purview. So I would be dividing into two portions, that is risk and compliance that you can see on your screen, and the other one is unified data governance. Now, when I talk about risk and compliance, I would say Microsoft 365 is one of the core component of Microsoft Purview risk and compliance, right? So its services such as Microsoft Teams and OneDrive and Exchange, there are some of the Microsoft 365 services that actually Microsoft Purview uses help and manage all our data, right? So Microsoft Purview actually uses these all things, that is Teams and the ones that I just mentioned, which helps us to manage and monitor the data. And when it comes to the second portion that you can see towards the right of your screen, that is unified data governance. So Purview basically provides us a very robust and unified data governance, which helps to cater in all the three areas as I mentioned, that is on-prem, multi-cloud, and software as a service data. Now, Microsoft Purview also helps us, provides us with the governance capability, which enables us to manage our data from Azure SQL and Hive databases. Even these two are areas in which we can manage our data with the help of Microsoft Purview. So this is the very basics of it, and it's more on a high level, that how Microsoft Purview basically functions in which areas, and then how does it helps us managing and monitoring our data on Azure. Now, the next one and the very important part is Azure policies, right? Now, what is Azure policy? So, Azure policy is actually a service in Azure which basically enables us to create, assign, and manage policies that control or audit our resources. Now, what does this means typically? So, as I mentioned a couple of minutes back as well, that it is very important that our resources are compliant in Azure, right? And so, what is that thing that helps us ensure that yes, our resources are compliant or they are non-compliant, and that alerts us? So, Azure policies basically helps us achieve that. So, what Azure policy essentially does is that it evaluates our resources and it highlights the resources which are not compliant, right? Now, when I'm saying compliant, non-compliant, what does it means at the first glance, right? So, Azure policies, we can define our own policies, which we ensure are compliant based on the policies that we have created. Correct. Now, you can have policies set up at different scopes. It can be at resource level, resource group level, or subscription level. So, in case you have attended my previous sessions, or in general, if you have knowledge about a bit about Azure infrastructure, so you know, right, how the infrastructure looks like. If you talk about it starts with subscription, you have the subscription at the top, and then you have resource groups, and then you have resources within it, right? So in case you have a policy in let's suppose at the subscription level, so it is, if it is at a parent level, then it automatically gets inherited to all the resources within it. So that's how Azure policy works. Now, I'll just give you an example of Azure policy. For example, let's suppose if we have a policy defined which says that, okay, only these particular 3 or 4 SKUs of VMs should be allowed to be deployed in this particular subscription, right? And no other SKU should be allowed. So, this is a policy that we have defined. Now, this policy will ensure that we are compliant to it. So, in case we end up like we cannot deploy any other virtual machine which does not belongs to the defined SKUs in the policies, right? So that is how it ensures that our resources are compliant to it. So the one that are already existing plus the one that we create in future. So that policy will ensure the compliance in this way. As I also spoke about inheritance a couple of minutes back, right? That how does all the resources inherit the policy if it has been declared at the parent level, correct? So I'll just give you an example of that. For example, if you have tags that you want to apply at every resource group and hence for the resource level. So you can have it as a part of the policy, maybe which is at the subscription level, that all the resource groups within this subscription should be having, and then resources within it should be having this particular tag, any tag, test tag, against all the resources that gets created within this particular subscription. So once you have that defined in the policy at the subscription level, all the resource groups and resources within it would be compliant to that. So that is how your policy works, right? And this is a very good way to ensure that you're compliant enough, and then you have built-in policies. You can define your own policies as well, the ones that I just mentioned, plus according to your needs and requirements as well. So these are the three key areas that you can create, you can manage, and then you can assign policies. Assign means at which level and at which resources do you want them. right? So that's typically what Azure policy means. Next up are resource locks, right? Now, this is a very important concept. What are resource locks? So, resource locks are basically ways of preventing your resources or your resource groups to get deleted by error, right? So once we now just imagine a scenario. Let's take a hypothetical situation. Let's suppose if in an organization, in a team, let's suppose there are multiple people working on a particular resource, right, with different access to it, with different roles. So now there is a possibility definitely that one might by error delete a resource, and then all the data and everything related to the resource would be gone, and we don't want that, right? So in that case, this is a very good preventive measure for such a situation where a resource gets deleted. We have something known as resource locks. So that is the purpose of it. If you don't want it to get deleted, let's suppose if it's in a production environment or a QA environment, model environment, and you do not want it to get deleted, you can have the resource locks at that particular level. Um, so I can actually show that to you as well. Let me take you to the Azure portal, and let's see if I have something, a resource existing. Okay, so we have this. I have some Docker VM already created. So if I take you a bit down, then this is a resource, correct? This is a resource. And if I go to logs, here you will see lock. So currently I have not configured any lock at the resource level, and henceforth it says the resource has no locks. There is no lock at the resource group or the subscription level as well. I believe so. Yeah, there was no lock, right? Now here is an option of creating a lock. You can have a lock name over here. You can have notes if you want, that's optional. And then here is the lock type. So there are two types of lock that you can have. One is the delete lock, and the other one is a read only lock. The read only lock basically means that you can read only means that it's just, as the name suggests, it is just read only, right? And you cannot delete this resource or something of that. And then the other one is the delete lock, which is pretty opposite to this one. So these are the two types of locks that are available to put against resource group, or subscription. And depending on your needs and requirements, you can have the lockup, and after that your resource would be compliant to that lock, right? So these are the two types of locks that you can have at all these three levels. And how to manage? So definitely, in case you don't want that lock to be there anymore, you have an option of deleting the lock as well. So I don't have any lock right now, and therefore I don't see anything. But once you have that up, you have an option of deleting. So if you're the admin, if you have admin, or if you have certain permissions to a particular resource, then you can delete the lock as well. So that's pretty much it about lock. And yes, we've also discussed about how to manage types and purpose of locks. Now, the next up is the features and tools for managing and deploying Azure resources. Now, how do you actually interact with the Azure resources? How can you manage them, right? That's a very important point. Now, to get started with it, Azure, you have two, three, four different options in a way. If I were to literally dissect them, you have four different options as to how can you interact with Azure resources. Now, the very first and foremost is definitely the Azure Portal, right? So we know Azure Portal is basically a web-based unified console wherein you can create, manage, and deploy your resources all together. So one that I showed you, if people are not aware, this is how the Azure Portal looks like. You don't have to code anything over here. You have to simply go create the resource whatever you want to, and literally your resource can get deployed within minutes. It's just a matter of few clicks and you can create the resource. So in case you have attended the previous sessions, you must have seen how I created a virtual machine, deployed a web browser, or sorry, a web server, and then how we dealt with storage services. How did we deploy that? So we have deployed couple of good amount of services in the previous sessions. You can have a look at it, and it's just a matter of few clicks. So if you're getting started with Azure, the first and foremost is to have good knowledge of how to work with Azure Portal, and it is pretty much user friendly. It's not even tough. It's very easy to navigate. It's a very simple UI, and it's pretty user friendly as well. So here is where you can actually deploy your resources, right? Now the next up is, that's very very important. uh, so first is Azure Portal. This is how you can interact with your resources, and the next one is Cloud Shell. So what is Azure Cloud Shell? Rather, it is Azure Cloud Shell. So what is that? So it is also a browser-based tool which helps us to allow, create, configure, and manage resources on Azure, but using a shell, right? So if I go on to Portal, here, if you see this, this is what is your Azure Cloud Shell. So it is available in the portal itself. I hope now the um, font is better, font size is better. So here you can see this. This is what your Cloud Shell is all about, right? And once I click here, so here I have two options, right, in the Cloud Shell itself. So one is your Azure PowerShell, and the other one is Azure CLI. So they both are actually a part of Cloud Shell itself, correct? And you can select the one that you want to, and then you can get started with it. Now, the best part of Cloud Shell is, if you're using Azure Cloud Shell, the very first thing is that it is a browser based shell experience, right? You do not need any type of local installation or any type of configuration as such that is required. These are a couple of features of Cloud Shell. Now, the second good part is that like once I log in into my sign in into my Azure portal, so the authentication is already done, right? So it is already authenticated to our Azure credentials, which is already inherited. So as such, no different authentication is required to use Cloud Shell. And third part is you get two options over here, that is CLI Bash and PowerShell. So whatever you are comfortable with, you can go ahead and get started with it. So these are three very good features of Cloud Shell. So you can deploy your resources via Cloud Shell as well by just typing a couple of commands in either of the option, either CLI Bash or PowerShell. Now, the next option, as I just spoke about Cloud Shell, as I said, it contains two options in it. One is Azure PowerShell and Azure CLI. So, what is Azure PowerShell? Azure PowerShell is, again, it is a shell which most of the developers and DevOps and IT professionals use, wherein they run their commands on PowerShell, and the commands that you run on PowerShell are known as commandlets. So what essentially happens when you type any PowerShell command, these commands actually call Azure REST APIs to perform the management tasks in Azure. This is what happens in the backend. And then your resource gets created, deployed. I mean, it's one and the same thing, created or deployed, or updated or deleted, whatsoever you want. So that is how typically PowerShell works. And then you have Azure CLI. Azure CLI, honestly, functionality wise, if we talk, it's pretty much similar to PowerShell. There is no big of a difference, but the only difference is the languages. I mean, this basically primarily uses, it's like the syntax of commands, right? This is more Bash, and then PowerShell uses PowerShell command. It absolutely depends on you whether you wish to you know I mean, which syntax are you more comfortable with, and then you can get started with either of the two tools. Now, what I am going to be doing is, um, we're going to be discussing ARM templates as well. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to be, diving a bit deep on PowerShell and ARM templates. These are very two topics which I think you guys should be aware. And I think PowerShell is again a very powerful tool, and in fact CLI as well. These are usually also used when you want to automate certain tasks, right? For example, if there are like a big Azure solution that needs to be deployed and something that's repetitive tasks. So PowerShell, CLI, these all are command-based tools which are used more often then. And henceforth I would like to dive a bit more deep into it. And also, in fact, one thing I want to mention, I did have a session in Microsoft Reactor itself a couple of months back, wherein it's just a session on ARM templates and PowerShell alone, and a combination of both. So in case you haven't attended that one and you're more interested to learn that, okay, how do you work, I've deployed resources with ARM templates and PowerShell over there. So I would really recommend you to have a look at the Microsoft Reactor Bangalore YouTube and get that session in, so that you can, understand. I literally started everything from scratch. So I would really recommend you to refer to that as well. Now, the next up is ARM templates. So, what are ARM templates? ARM templates are actually JSON files wherein we can declare what are the resources that we wish to deploy. Right. So, what are JSON files? JSON files are basically JavaScript object notations. And with the help of ARM templates, we can actually configure the resource in a very declarative syntax manner. I know this is a bit of theory, but let's go a bit ahead so that you get to know a bit more. Now, the question is, why ARM templates? The best part is that ARM templates have a reusable syntax, which I'm going to be showing you in a couple of minutes as well. So, what happens in ARM templates is basically, let's think of a scenario. Let's suppose you have a virtual machine, right, which needs to be deployed. And there is one virtual machine, okay, you deploy it, you create on Azure Portal and you simply deploy it. Let's suppose you want to deploy 5 or 10 virtual machines, hypothetically. Everything remains the same and you just want to change the name of it and you want to change, let's suppose, the SKU of it. With the help of ARM templates, you can have a common template in place wherein you just pass the SKU and the name of the virtual machine dynamically. That means that keeps on getting changed, but the rest of the things, like let's suppose the resource group or the region or the subscription, still remains the same. So in that case, ARM templates are one of the best ways to get started with it, and that's more efficient because you're going to save on time, and that would also you know um 1 second, sorry. And that would also be less error prone, because when you manually do things, there could be human errors. But if you already have something in place which you have created, so the chances of having any human error would be still less, and that will make your work more efficient in terms of time as well. It also has its integration with the Azure DevOps CI/CD. You can also track deployments with ARM templates. Now, let me give you an example of how it actually works. So this is the basic structure of ARM template that you can see in your screen. So you have something known as schema, right? All of this I have covered in one session, standalone session, just for ARM templates a few months back, but just reiterating and revisiting it a bit more. Uh, so it has a schema, it has a content version. You have, I'm so sorry, 1 second, guys. Then we have parameter fields, we have a field for function, variables, and then you see this one, the seventh line, resources. This is the main field. This is where you deploy your resources. Any resource, literally any resource. It could be storage account, virtual machine, app service, VNets, anything you can deploy over here in this resources section. Variables is something that you can have it declared over here. Then in turn, you can pass the variable name over here in the resource. And then you have the section of output as to how do you want the output to be once the resource gets deployed. So these are literally seven fields of 7 fields which are a part of the basic structure of ARM templates. Here is a very good example where you would be understanding how it actually works. Now, the right side, if you see this particular one, is how you create what is it? Okay, yeah. How you create a storage account on your Azure portal. So the right picture is of Azure portal, okay, and the left image is that of an Azure. Sorry, not Azure. Sorry, the left one is that of an ARM template. So ARM template and Azure portal. So here in Azure portal, what we basically do is we have a storage account name that we have to put in, region, performance tier, standard or premium, and the redundancy option, right? This is what we put in. Cut to, if you see on the left side, this is how you do it on the ARM template. So within resources section, if you recall, which I told you, here is where the magic happens, line number 7. So here is where we have the name of the storage account, the type automatically comes in, the API version, tags, if we need any, we can have that up, the location, right? Which is picking up the location of the resource group, the kind of the storage account, and the SKU. So as I said, let's suppose it is premium and premium LRS. That means here it's going to be premium and here it's going to be LRS in the drop down of redundancy. That's how basically your ARM template works. Now, one of the best part of ARM templates is like when you deploying one two resources in Azure is a different thing. But let's suppose if you want to deploy an entire infrastructure in Azure, which has hypothetically a bunch of 10 to 20 resources, which needs to be deployed, and that too they're associated with each other and they have a dependency on each other, right? In that case, using ARM templates and making it a part of IAC, which I covered in the session as well, that is infrastructure as a cloud, infrastructure as code, sorry, is one of the best ways to have everything in place. And then especially for repetitive tasks, is something that is happening on a large scale. ARM templates, PowerShell scripts are one of the best ways to get started with. I mean, get started with, and that can be used so that your entire infrastructure deployment becomes more efficient and error free as well. So that is one. And actually, one more thing I wanted to show about ARM templates to you guys is that even on the Azure portal, whatever you deploy, most of the resources at the backend get converted into an ARM template. So I can actually show you. Let's suppose this is the Docker VM that I had deployed for one of the purposes. And here, if you come down, you would see an option of export template, right? And let template get generated. When it's going to be getting generated, it's going to get generated. See, here it is in the format of ARM template. So there's nothing but an ARM template that has gotten generated automatically at the backend. So this is the ARM template of this particular Docker VM. That is the resource. So whatever other SKUs or the specifications of this virtual machine, they're all actually present here as well. So these are the parameters, and then you have all of these parameters are there. Variables, I don't have any, but the resource here. So the type of the resource automatically comes in. That is a compute virtual machine, the API version. It is picking up the name from the parameters that is already defined above, location, everything. What is the VM size? I'm using a B2MS. Then I'm using Ubuntu 2004. Everything, whatever I'm using, the OS type is Linux. Everything is mentioned over here, right? You see, everything automatically comes over here. So this is the ARM template for my um, Azure virtual machine. And similarly, here you can see my parameters also automatically get defined. And similarly, you can see for storage account, etc., you would be seeing an option over here. And this is the backend. You see everything automatically gets converted into an ARM template at the backend. This is how it happens. Now the next one is PowerShell. Now PowerShell, as I said, it is a command line tool, right? And one of the best use cases of it is for automation. Okay, something that I want to do on a large scale. I want to automate things. Hypothetically, if I want a particular VM or particular set of VMs to be shut down, let's suppose after every 3 hours, or whenever they are not in use, I can have a script for that automatically, rather than going into resource and shutting down the VMs. I can have a script ready for it which automatically runs. So it's really good for automation purposes. It is one of the best scripting languages when you can have the script in place and you have to simply run it with the resources mentioned on it as the scope. And definitely it is also used for the deployment of resources. You can deploy a virtual machine and all the resources via PowerShell as well. Now, what are the basic steps of deploying a resource using a PowerShell? So, if you're using Azure PowerShell, the one that I showed you on the cloud, Azure Cloud Shell on the portal itself, then you're already logged in. So that's not what I'm talking about right now. But what I'm talking about is installing PowerShell on if you're using the PowerShell of your local machine. So the very first thing that you have to do is you'll have to configure a connection of your local PowerShell on your local machine with the Azure, right? So first thing is you will have to connect to Azure. The next step is that you will have to once you have connected to Azure, maybe you'll have to install a certain modules. Depends. You can see that you would get a proper documentation about it on the internet as well. So you just have to connect. And the second one is you have to get list of subscriptions. which subscription you want to work on. You can set a subscription, then you can create resources, you can deploy a resource, you can update the resource if need be, and if possible, so on and so forth. So basically, connecting and setting a subscription, these two are the main get started points. And then after that, whatsoever you want to do on the resource, create, oblique, deploy or update, then you can perform your actions. But this is the basic, that connection should be there. If you want to know how to do, please refer to the session that I've already done, and everything is practically explained over there. But I just want to give you a bit brief of it, and henceforth I thought of having it up um, on the slide deck as well today. Again, I've already spoken about the use cases of PowerShell, automation, deploying and managing Azure resources, and modifying the existing resources. So this is where you have a lot many use cases as well, but these are a couple of them which are more prominent, right? Now, the next up is Azure Arc, right? So Azure Arc is basically, it helps us extend our Azure compliance and monitoring to a hybrid and a multi-cloud configuration. Okay, and we know that Azure definitely provides us with a lot of tools wherein we can provision and configure and monitor Azure resources. But if you're thinking about the on-prem resources, let's suppose in a hybrid configuration, or the cloud resources, let's suppose in a multi-cloud configuration, that is where Azure Arc actually comes into the picture. So Azure Arc essentially helps us extend our compliance and monitoring to the hybrid and the multi-cloud configurations altogether. So Azure Arc basically provides us with a very centralized way wherein we can manage our entire environment by projecting our existing non-Azure resources into the ARM. And we can also manage multi-cloud and hybrid virtual machines, let's suppose Kubernetes clusters and databases, at all if they are running on Azure. So that is typically what Azure Arc does. Now, next up, and very important, is Azure monitoring tools. Now, monitoring your Azure resources that are already deployed are extremely important. And that's because of two main reasons. Now, the first reason is that if you've deployed a resource, you have to ensure that particular resource is up and running. Let's suppose if you have deployed it in a production environment, you need to know that you need to be sure that it is, maintaining its SLA, that is the service level agreement, and it is also up and running, and that there is no issue, in general. So, to first, monitoring is very important for keeping a check on its performance. And also, the second important thing uh, that's very important, that why you should monitor your Azure resources, is because of the cost perspective. Let's imagine if there is a virtual machine which is set to a higher SKU, which is charging us a lot, and let's suppose it is not even being used that much. So we can simply scale it down, right? And get it to a SKU which is less in price as well. And it will also, cater to our needs and requirements of the CPU and the memory, etc. But that is only possible when we monitor our resources closely, so that we can get to know that whether it is performing well or not, or whether there is a scope of scaling the resource down. Or it could be the other way around as well. Let's suppose if there is some memory CPU issue or something in the resource, then you can simply scale it up as well. So either way is correct, but it's very important to monitor your Azure resources closely so that you can take these decisions. Now, as I talk about Azure monitoring, one of the most important tool that comes into the picture is Azure Advisor. What Azure Advisor essentially does, sorry, it makes basically recommendations, right? Firstly, it evaluates all our resources that are deployed in a particular subscription. That's the first thing it does. And after evaluating the resources, it makes recommendations, which helps us improve its reliability, security, performance, and cost. So it basically caters to all these different factors. Sorry, guys. So this is a very good feature or a tool by Microsoft. It basically has a dashboard as well, which displays pretty personalized recommendations for all our subscriptions. So if you go onto Azure Portal and you type Azure Advisor, you will see something of this sort, the one that I have a screenshot on the screen, right? And the factors that are mentioned over here, that is, oops. So these factors that I've mentioned, that is reliability, security, performance, cost, operational excellence. These are the areas where Azure Advisor typically, provides us recommendations. And when you go on to each one of these, you know, what do you say, like each of these boxes and these key factors, so you're going to see the recommendations that come up. So let's suppose from cost it can provide us certain recommendations, and they also divide the recommendations, if you can see, in three different categories, that is high impact, medium, and low. Something that is really critical, something can be that can be done ASAP, something that is of medium impact, and something that is of really low impact. And here you have an option also of filtering your results, right? Like you have subscriptions. Let's suppose if you have multiple subscriptions in your Azure tenant, then you can filter it according to the subscriptions and then according to the active or non-active and all these categories. So automatically you do have, and then you have an option of accepting that particular recommendation made by advisor or not, right? So it's a very powerful tool, and someone who has the infrastructure running on Azure can definitely check out Azure Advisor. And even in general, even if individuals are having multiple resources deployed on Azure and they want to keep a check of it, in terms of monitoring its performance and everything, cost and all, I would really recommend to go onto Azure Advisor, and it's pretty easy to use. And you can have a look and you can just play around with it to have a better understanding of how it works. The next up is Azure Monitor. This is the second very important monitoring tool that Azure provides. What Azure Monitor essentially does is, basically it is a platform that collects our data on your resources. It analyzes it and then it visualizes it. So collecting, analyzing, and visualizing, these are the three things that typically what Azure Monitor does. And that is easily depicted on the picture that you can see on the screen, on the diagram. So the first, this portion, if you see, here is where your data is getting collected. Guys, please give me 1 second. Just have a bit of bad throat, so please bear with me. Yeah, sorry. So as I said, Azure Monitor is basically a platform that collects, analyzes, and visualizes the information, and then gives us, and then accordingly we can act on the results. So as I said, collects. So this is the way how it collects. So basically collects as in the resources, right? The resources that are associated with Azure Monitor, it collects the uh, the data from there. The next up is it analyzes the data. Correct. So data platform, it analyzes, it collects the data in a way, in terms of logs, metrics, and traces. So let's suppose if you have, it collects this from any of your Azure resource, hypothetically think over here. After that, the next step is to collect it in a way, right? So it collects in a way of metrics, logs, and traces, and post that it visualizes it in the form of, let's suppose you can have it visualized in the form of Power BI or dashboards. You can have some dashboards, Grafana, workbooks, or you can also have it experienced it in application insights, container, virtual machines. You can analyze the data once you have it in the form of logs in Log Analytics, which I would be discussing in a couple of minutes. Once you've analyzed the data, you can also have certain alerts that can be set up, right? Let's suppose if you want that a particular virtual machine that hits a CPU mark beyond 80% and you need to be alerted, you can have Azure alerts set up for that. You would be alerted on email. Let's suppose if a particular VM is consuming more than 80% of CPU, right? That's like a performance monitoring alert that you can set up. And then definitely you can integrate that with different tools such as logic apps, right? So let's suppose if you want, the moment the moment a particular VM has hit 80% CPU, you want an email to be sent, to so and so people. You can have it in the alerts, and then once the moment that alert gets triggered, let's suppose you have a logic app designed which says, okay, the moment the alert gets triggered, I want to have a notification, let's suppose on Microsoft Teams, hypothetically, right? That's something that logic app can help you achieve. So it logic app basically takes an action the moment there is some trigger that happens. Even otherwise it works, but I'm just letting you know about this particular example how it works. So as I said, Azure Log Analytics is a very powerful tool again. So what Azure Log Analytics does is basically data collection. You have a log analytic workspace wherein you can run your KQL queries in order to query the logs. Anything you want to query. Maybe you can query that, okay, what have been the let's suppose failed login attempts in a particular VM, or software installations that have happened in a particular VM. I'm giving an example of VM because it's like a common resource, but it works on every phase literally. And you can have the KQL queries ready for that, and then you can visualize that data and you will get the result as well. So I can actually show you over here. Like for example, if I go on to my this thing, right? Let's suppose virtual machine. Here itself, we should be having, you see, an option of logs over here. So I haven't actually enabled it, and that's the reason I'm not able to see it. But if I go here to Azure Monitor, which is again a monitoring tool, as I just said, here is where you can see that, and you would be able to configure alerts. You would be able to see the metrics, and here is where you can query the logs that it collects. So right now, I don't think so. I've configured any resource, honestly. Yes, I haven't configured any resource, and therefore I'm not able to see anything over here. I'll have to select a scope, which is not selected yet. But if I do so, here is where you can actually run your queries. You have an option of selecting a particular time range. You can save it. You can create new alert out of it. You can pin it, and you would be, once you select the scope, you would be able to see the data over here, and then you can query that out, right? I can literally have that at different levels, at a subscription resource group. I can select a particular resource within it whatsoever I want. Correct. So these are some typical things that you can do with the help of Azure Log Analytics. That's mostly for tracing. If let's suppose if there is some error that has occurred, in your production environment or in your app service or something. So these are some very basic steps that you do. You query certain things in order to get the logs. You sort of have look at the logs, what's actually happening within it, etc., etc. So these are a couple of things that we generally do, even from the troubleshooting perspective, because that gives you a deeper insight of it. As I spoke about insight, the next step is Azure Application Insights. As I had mentioned in Azure Monitor diagram as well, it was mentioned over there. Azure Application Insights are basically used for web app performance monitoring and tracking. And this basically helps you give the live metrics, that which are the requests that are getting. Let's suppose if you have an Azure web app deployed on your Azure portal, and you want to check its performance and how is it performing, how is it taking the different API calls, are they getting succeeded or failed. So you would be able to see live metrics over there, as well as you would be able to see the failed API detections, what is the cause, etc., etc. So all those things are actually available in Azure Application Insights. And similarly, if you have a web app installed and it's not working well, you're having some issues, first troubleshooting is head on to Azure Application Insights and check its logs, check what are the API calls that have been failed, what have been succeeded, what are the issue. You can trace it to a very granular level as well. So that's pretty much about Azure Application Insights. And actually, that's mostly about today's session as well. That how can you actually monitor your resources on Azure and in terms of governance and compliance. As I'm ending this, one more important note that I wanted to give was, in any Azure infrastructure, there are a couple of very important pillars which it needs to be supported with. And that could be like, you need to ensure that that infrastructure is pretty much optimized from the perspective of performance, from the perspective of cost, and it is pretty much secured, right? So these are a couple of pillars that any infrastructure should be supported with, and these are the best practices, also the ones that I actually showed you. Be it about monitoring, you should be having all these things enabled, so that you are pretty much aware of what is actually happening within your infrastructure. And that's when you would be able to take appropriate steps. Or let's suppose having alerting in place, again, that's a very good way of knowing about the performance of a particular resource that you have deployed. How is it performing? What is happening within it? Is it failing? Is it consuming so much of high CPU? How's it like? So all of these things is something that you should be aware of if you're in charge of your infrastructure. And these are some good practices as well, which you can um, see if you want to sort of have it up deployed on your infrastructure. So yeah, that was pretty much it from my side for today's session, actually for this series as well. And we have covered all the important topics in all the sessions. You can go through once again if you haven't. And this is something which will really help you in getting started with your journey in Azure as well. And it is also part of AZ900 series which we are running in Microsoft Reactor. So yes, we have covered all the topics, important topics. And today marks the last session of this series. For the people who have been attending, thank you so much for attending the sessions, and thank you for everyone who are who is attending this as well. And I really hope that you found this educative and informative. And 1%, if you have any questions, literally any questions, just uh, if not now, you don't have any questions right now, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. And yeah, I just hope that it was valuable for you all.
Yes. Thank you, Navika. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I think we have one question. Um, Hold on. I'll bring that question.
Yeah.
Bring it up. When we have ARM templates, what is why there is a need of a Azure Bicep? I think is the thing
Oh,
that Satyam has been asking. Yeah.
oh gosh, there's so many questions. How did I miss? Okay, yeah. So, yes. So biceps is actually, that's a good question. That's something new that has come up, and biceps is actually, if you're just getting started with it, I think you can get started with biceps, because bicep is more easier to work with, right? ARM templates was something that came before Azure biceps, but the use case of both is pretty much similar. But it is just that bicep is more easier to use. Someone who's getting started with the infrastructure as code, IAC, you can get started with bicep as well, but the
Great.
purpose still remains pretty much same.
I hope that answers Satyam's question. And yes, how can we see API's bottleneck using Azure Monitor?
How can we see APIs bottleneck using Azure Monitor? So firstly, you should be having that configuration in place. I could have shown that to you, because I don't have all those things right now configured in my environment. Henceforth, I cannot show you, but all of that is actually visible. Like hypothetically, let's talk about, if that's what your question is. If you're talking about Azure Monitor, and then something that's more related to it is also Azure Application Insights, right? So that actually gives you a feature wherein you can actually see the API bottlenecks, as in what are getting succeeded, what are getting failed. So you have, towards the left panel, you have these different options available, wherein you can actually go in there and you can actually sort of query the APIs, and you can just get down to the logs at a very granular level. Uh, and this is something that, it's more of a practical question, honestly, the one that you've asked. But yeah, on a very high level, that's the answer. Okay, I see one more question. Satyam says, if both are similar, why are we still using ARM? I mean, it depends on you what you want to use, right? I had it on my deck, and I wanted to tell you about template, because as I showed you, even on the Azure portal, you can see templates, right? So templates is something. It depends on you. That's what I'm saying, right? Like if you're getting started and you do not sort of uh, have that much of prior knowledge about IAC, that is infrastructure as code, then you can get started with the Azure Biceps, and it serves the same purpose. But if someone who's already been working on ARM templates, so they can carry on with that, or they want to check with Biceps as well. There's no cherry picking out of the two. It depends on which out of the two are you comfortable with. There's no hard and fast rule to, about it. It's just that whatever you are comfortable with.
Okay, he says thank you. Great, Satyam.
Awesome.
So yes, please do reach out if you have any more questions coming up. I've shared Navika's LinkedIn link. You all can reach out to Navika over LinkedIn, and she's very much active there, and she can help you out all there with all your questions coming up. And yes, thank you, Navika. Thank you so much for doing this series, and thank you everyone for joining us for the series. I hope you all had a great learning, and hope you all have a great learning with our next series coming up. And
Sure. And
thank you all so much. Yep,
I would like to take a
please.
moment to firstly thank all the audience and the viewers of It who have been a part of this series. The whole idea of all of us together was to just, sort of impart more knowledge about Azure, and I hope that you guys found it educative, insightful, and informative. And yeah, thank you to the entire MVP program team as well for this opportunity, and to the Reactor team, all of you, Parth, Rashmita. Thank you for such a smooth coordination that happened. I just look forward to more such collaboration so that we can get some, good educational content for all the viewers.
Sure, we can program that soon. And yes, thank you all once again. Thank you for joining, and hope you all have a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Navika.